from Spending Affordability Advisory Committee. Last time we had extensive discussion about financial impact analysis, HOCO by design. So this week we'll switch the subject a little bit, and then next week we'll come back and wrap up the financial impact analysis because the committee is going to deliver a report by end of this month related to that financial analysis of HOCO by design to county executive. So today we have a packed agenda with multiple speakers, and thanks in advance to everyone who joined today and to the team that's going to present on different subjects. Our focus will be the capital project there. I will have a very quick CIP overview, and I'll hand it over to our colleagues at the Department of Public Works there. They will talk a couple of a big project and also the long-term maintenance needs for stormwater. And then our friends at Community College and Library will share their needs or the status of the project for their own agencies there. And after that, Dr. Irani is going to provide economic outlook. I want to make sure everybody be mindful and try to keep your speech within 15 minutes because I want to make sure everybody get a chance, and ideally leave about half an hour for Dr. Rani to talk about economic outlook, since that ultimately help inform the development of revenue projection, which is one of the key undertake of this committee. So let's start. Before we talk about the capital, I just want a quick wrap up on the follow-up questions raised by Dr. Clinch at last meeting. And he was asking whether per capita spending has kind of increased or picked up or not. The finding is actually interesting. I want to share with the committee is that our per capita spending or per capita revenue actually has slowed down in the last 5 years. It's averaging about 2.2% per year. And because inflation in this period was more than 3%, so once you adjust it for inflation, per capita spending and revenue actually have seen a negative increase. In other words, have fallen behind the inflation growth in this period. I guess it's not completely surprising because we know as a committee, many members here, we have seen a revenue slowdown in general in the last several years compared to historical level, and obviously inflation has been picking up more recently, so that combined caused that result. In terms of the school spending, the per capita is largely tracking the overall per capita spending, but per pupil spending has been better at about 3.5% growth per year. And the reason is because enrollment was hit by the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, if you recall, we actually lost the students quite a bit. After that, things has been improving, but even today, we haven't even reached the pre-pandemic level. So as a result, when you divide by student, the per capita spending per student spending actually have been growing relatively stronger. So with that, we talked back with Dr. Clinch. It looks there's no need to make any changes to the fiscal impact analysis. Nevertheless, it's good information to share with the committee. Okay, CIP. The outlook, I would say, it's probably more than challenging. So I use the word extremely difficult because that's truly what I feel currently for all kinds of reasons. So first, just to a recap of the county's authorized new GEO budget every year. So as you remember, last few years, the county's authorized GEO supported CIP average between 72 to 75 million. And that is in acknowledge of the fact that the county's debt indicators has all been increasing for last several years in a row, and it's becoming a concern. And also because the revenue growth, as we just mentioned, has been slowing down for last several years there. So we were very mindful of keeping the overall debt burden and keep it under roughly $75 million in recent years. The request, however, from everyone, the GEO combined, is 3 times that level for FY24. All the requests we received is about 237 million. The number is still evolving and it's going to change. We'll eventually bring it closer to where we can afford, but at this point, it's 3 times the affordability. And not only FY24, the multi-year, 5 years beyond that, it's also 2.5 times the affordable level just based on historical practice and assessment of reality. So that being said, which just mathematically means that on average, there, the current request from everybody will need to be reduced by almost 2/3 or delayed by more than 2/3. So it is a very daunting task at this point, and we will figure out how to make it work in the next a couple months. But it's going to be extremely challenging, and there are various reasons for that. And obviously, there's all kinds of stakeholders' needs, wants, and desire for different project there. There's always a reason behind that. They're all justified. It's just like getting more and more and also more expensive. Construction costs has been increasing, and sometimes when you get deeper in the project, there's new findings on the engineering side that's actually warrant more cost there. There's also deferred maintenance, which the committee is very familiar with, that continue to accumulate, and something not get addressed, just getting more expensive later. So overall, we are facing a pretty tough job here. The other thing is that we have been exploring different options in the past few years there. So as a result, we really have very limited options, untapped at this point. We have been doing a couple years in a row, for example, setting aside PayGo as cash investment into some well-needed CIP project. For example, we have been trying to secure more predictable multi-investment road resurfacing and use the PayGo to help meet debt burden for like city safe and sound, and also promote school project, etc. So that we have been doing. We also, thanks to all kinds of collaboration between elected officials here, including the county delegates at the state there, the school surcharge rate was increased multiple steps in the last few years. Transfer tax rates was increased. These are designated revenues to support school, fire, recreation parks, and other capital projects there. These have been already explored. Federal funding, we try to allocate a piece of upper funding for capital, and also the state have been providing us more funding for school system, including 35 million, I think, pass-through grant to help enhance school project there. And we also tried alternative financing options such as Wi-Fi loan to help lower the annual cost there. So we really tried almost everything possible. I would say tapped all low-hanging fruits and middle-hanging fruit there. So what's still left there is really very limited. We'll continue to explore that, but we are looking at a situation. We don't have too much additional tools we can tap. The other issue is at this point, as everybody know, that because interest rate is very high, borrowing is getting more expensive. So the same bond, we have to pay more every year in terms of interest payment there. Another issue is that some of the designated revenues to support capital projects, they are closely tied to housing markets. As a result, the last couple of years was really good, but then past several months was not. In fact, some of those revenue have been experiencing double-digit, even more than 30% decrease from the same period of last year. So that's also tightening the funding availability to help support the project. So overall, we acknowledge there are all kinds of needs, there are all kinds of rising demands from everybody, and they all have stakeholders there. But at the end of the day, we only have so much resources. Even we can be, continue to try different ways there. I think our ability is clearly well under what people would requested at this point there. So we do have to collaborate with everyone, try to bring things balanced, in fact, in the next few months there. So with that, I'll hand it over to our colleagues at DPW, and they will provide highlights for a couple of critical projects or needs from their end. Thank you. So Zach, do you want to
Sure.
start?
Yeah. Can the administrator give me the share cape? Thank you. Everybody see WebEx now? Or, I mean, sorry, PowerPoint.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zach Hollenbeck. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Bureau of Facilities in the Department of Public Works, as well as the project manager for the North Tunnel and the Ellicott City Safe and Sound Plan. And I'll run through an update of where we stand with the Safe and Sound Plan and some of the major ongoing efforts. So the Safe and Sound, EC Safe and Sound Plan is multifaceted. And the part that we're going to primarily speak to today is the flood mitigation projects. Those are a collection of 7 unique projects that all work as a system to comprehensively mitigate the flash floods that we've seen in 2016 and 2018. These very intense, unpredictable flash flood scenarios that are often referred to as top-down floods that emanate from the upper hills or the western part of Ellicott City and inundate lower Main Street. There's other components here that we've been progressing as well, or have completed, including the master plan, an emergency alert system, and some high ground access points to provide additional egress from the floodplain. Now, this map here shows the 7 projects that make up the flood mitigation plan. Very excited to announce that we've completely finished the H7 project. The Quaker Mill project, which is along Rogers at Patapsco River Road, is substantially complete and will be completed within the next couple of weeks. So 2 of the 7 are now beneficially functional, and we continue to make excellent progress in progressing the other projects that are in design. Current funding wise, what you see here on the left are images of those 2 projects that I just mentioned a moment ago, the H7 in the Cloverleaf of 2940, which was completed this summer, and Quaker Mill, which will be complete within the next couple of weeks. In terms of funding for the remaining projects, we have some funds that have been appropriated through FY23 to advance design, acquisition, and construction for H4 Maryland Avenue projects, and then the North Tunnel, as well as design and construction for NC3 and T1 projects. I'm going to primarily speak to the North Tunnel here, but this graphic shows the alignment of the North Tunnel. The North Tunnel is envisioned as an 18-foot diameter, 5,300-foot hard rock tunnel that will originate in the west end of Ellicott City near the intersection of Frederick Road and Papillon Drive, proceed some approximately 150 feet down below grade before traversing the 5,300-foot alignment that you see represented by the curved orange line here to a point of discharge north of the bridge over Main Street into the Patapsco River. This will intercept water at the intersection of Papillon Drive, at the intersection of Rogers Avenue and Frederick Road, as well as in Ellicott City's parking lot F, which is behind the log cabin. This project is the single most impactful component of the EC Safe and Sound Plan, as I mentioned, and it will intercept these floodwaters that we've seen in 16 and 18 before they even make it through Ellicott City's conveyance network that wraps underneath and behind buildings, and take that water and put it directly below ground. So when we look at this project, our goals have been to start this project as soon as possible. We all know that Ellicott City is on borrowed time. And we've really been pushing hard to get this project in the ground and functional as quickly as we can. And the other thing is to lock in cost certainty. We need to know when we begin construction on this project that, 1, that we have the funds to complete it, and 2, how much it will cost. And we need to understand all the risks that go in this. This is an underground project, and there are some risks that need to be considered that are unique to underground work. And so in order to do that, we've progressed with a construction manager at risk model using a guaranteed maximum price effort to progress construction. So we originally conceived and budgeted for this project in late 2019, early 2020, and received direction to proceed with this project pre-pandemic in January of 2020. So the original project budget that we've been functioning on was conceived in late 2019. Since that time, we've progressed through preliminary design, through final design to the point where we're nearing the completion of final design. And we've realized, as with a project of this complexity, some unique project cost drivers. We've had to spend a little bit more than we originally anticipated on the design and other engineering components. We've brought in a third-party technical rep to advise us. Since the county has not constructed a tunnel before, we needed that third-party expertise. We've added an additional collection point along Rogers Avenue to intercept additional waterways and improve the efficacy of the plan in the west end, which will be a benefit locally in the west end of Ellicott City. Perhaps the biggest cost driver that we've seen is complexities with everything at the surface. So all the components that will intercept the water are more complex than we originally envisioned, partially due to utilities and other surface features that we've been having to work with. We've been working with our partners at CSX to get their approval to move forward, which is certainly more complex than we envisioned when we budgeted this job. We do have some utility conflicts, which are not unique to this type of project, some acquisition challenges, and lastly, the commodity costs of things like the tunnel boring machine that we need to execute this project, which itself is in excess of $10 million, has increased and that's primarily due to the cost increases that we've all seen on every day, but really those electrical components and the other machined components of that fabrication have drastically increased in cost, as people who work in the building industry would know, specifically the electrical componentry. And so, when we look at where we budgeted this project in 2019 versus where we are today, we've tried to really work hard to control costs and be able to execute this project as expeditiously as possible. As we work through those project cost drivers that I spoke to a minute ago and work through various value engineering exercises to try to bring this project in for the minimal construction cost to get it operational, we've been drastically impacted by inflation, which is certainly outside any of our control here on the county. And so what we've plotted here is the potential impact of that original budget with inflation over that time. And then there's two curves here that we've plotted. One is the consumer price index curve, and then the second is engineering news record, which is more used in the construction industry. And I'll just point out really briefly here. And then this the exhibit on the right is from Engineering News Records 2020 issue, where they track construction inflation across the U.S. And they track a number of unique markets. So in November, Baltimore was the worst impacted market of the 20-some markets that they track for inflation. In December, you see building construction costs there highlighted. So if we're just looking at the building market, year to date, 21.6% inflation, just in the building market year to date in the Baltimore metro area. Overall construction cost at 13.5%. And so as we look at these various curves and the impact of these things, we think and project that the impact of inflation on our project itself will be some 25 to 30%. So where we are now, we're continuing to advance this design. We're very, very close to completing the design while we attempt to progress the other components of EC Safe and Sound. And so I like to say there's 5 critical paths on this project. Design-wise, like I mentioned, we're substantially complete. We just are dotting the I's and crossing the T's to wrap that up. We're continuing to progress the negotiations that we need, working collectively with for all the acquisitions that we need, working collectively with every impacted property owner, continuing to have great discussions with them and working through the technical parts of that process. We're continuing to work with our partners at CSX to secure their approval to tunnel underneath the railroad at the Patapsco River, which is crucial to obviously drain the water from our watershed. We have made great progress with regulatory approvals from our state and federal partners to progress this project, and we have no concerns about getting all the approvals that we need to get there. That's been a multi-year process that we've worked extensively on, and are grateful to both our state, federal, and local partners for that. And then, the funding wise, which is critical, right? So, we've spent enormous effort to bring in a construction manager to advise us, to work through value engineering exercises to try to deliver this project for the minimal cost to get it functional, as I mentioned before. And so provided that we can secure the funding that we need to move this project forward, We anticipate beginning the bidding processes in the very near future, and then a series of one or more awards to begin the mobilization for some of those long lead time components that we need to begin the construction, moving through this being a 36 to 42 month construction project. That's what I have. Holly, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. I think Mark, can you talk? So, Mark, would you like to run for your screen, or you would like me to do that, or Zark, maybe you can continue.
I think Zach's doing a great job advancing slides, so I'm going to rely on him.
So Zark, can you put it back?
Good
All right.
morning.
So after Mark, you finish, then we can open for like questions, and then we will move to next speaker. Thank you. Go ahead, Mark.
Great. Thanks, Holly. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Richmond. I'm the chief of the Stormwater Management Division for Howard County within the Department of Public Works. Two of the major efforts within our division is making sure the county meets its NPDES permit goals and performing capital projects and pond repairs. So those are the two areas I'm going to talk about this morning. Next slide. I mentioned that the county has an NPDES permit. It's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And that permit comes from EPA, but it's regulated by the state of Maryland. And it's sometimes called an MS4 permit, which stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And the primary funding for pretty much all we do in the Stormwater Division, and that I'm going to be talking about today, is through the Watershed Protection and Restoration Fund, through the issuance of stormwater bonds. Next slide. So the purpose of the permit is essentially to improve water quality. And one of the ways that we do that is by providing additional water quality treatment for impervious surfaces that aren't already treated for water quality. And that ultimately helps the water quality in the in all of our waterways, as well as the Chesapeake Bay. We've just completed one round of permits. They typically are 5-year permits. And we spent roughly $15 million each year to meet our permit requirements. We have a new permit as of December 30th, 2022, which again is another 5-year permit. And what we're projecting for the next 5 years is an anticipated funding of $16.5 million each year. And that's to do watershed restoration, which typically is in the form of stream restoration, as well as doing pond repairs, which is another requirement of the permit to keep our infrastructure in working condition. If we do not complete our permit conditions, we could be subject to a consent order, which essentially means we'd be assessed monetary fines, as well as still having to perform the work. So it's kind of a double whammy. Next slide. And the other thing I mentioned that we do, and is a great need for the county, is maintaining our stormwater infrastructure. Next slide. And this typically comprised of stormwater management ponds and doing the maintenance. And I wanted to maybe give a little bit of background, because most of you have probably seen something like the picture on the right, which is a kind of a concrete box with a metal trash rack on it, but maybe aren't sure what happens after the water gets in there. So the schematic on the top left shows what you don't see when you're standing outside. The vertical component is called a riser. There's also a horizontal component, which is a barrel pipe, and that goes underneath the pond embankment. And our maintenance work is to make sure that those barrels and risers do not fail, because if that fails, the earth and embankment will fail, and A, the pond will not function, and B, there's problems downstream. The risers and the barrel pipes when stormwater management first came into existence, could be made of metal or concrete. In the mid 1990s, the state basically said the metal pipes don't have a long enough service life. We can no longer use metal pipes. Since then, we have gone to all concrete infrastructure for the barrel and the riser. You can see that the metal design life is 20 to 25 years. The concrete is, 3 to 4 times longer than that. Next slide, please. One of the things that we do relative to the stormwater ponds is the county is required, and my division inspects every stormwater facility within the county, whether it's publicly owned and maintained or privately owned and maintained. And at this point, there's close to 20,000 stormwater BMPs throughout the county. The county is responsible for the maintenance of a little over 1,500 of these stormwater ponds, and 187 at this point still have the metal components and they're approaching their design life. So the need to convert or repair the ponds from a metal infrastructure to a concrete infrastructure is paramount, and that's what we're concentrating on. You can see in the bottom left table, when we do our triennial inspections, we visit every pond, every facility once every 3 years. You can see that the ponds that have metal pipes, we rate them on a scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being, in good shape, 4 being in critical need of repair. And as you can see, almost half of the remaining ponds with metal infrastructure are rated as a 4, which means they're in need of repair as soon as possible. If what we're seeing now in today's dollars is that it's roughly $1.7 million to do these repairs per pond. So if we look at just the 82 rated 4 ponds, that's a total of $140 million. And again, that's before any inflation. What we would like to ask for and have been asking for is roughly $13 million each year, which will allow us to do 7 to 8 ponds each year. That's a fairly realistic number for the staff and the consultants we have on board. At that rate, it would take us, more than a decade, 11 to 12 years, to address all the rated 4 ponds. And in that time, I dare say that the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s will get worse, and that number is going to continue to grow. So there is a very large need for capital funds to get the repairs done. Next slide. What I wanted to show here is maybe first show a couple examples of pond infrastructure, the old, on the top right, metal barrel and riser, where there's been a separation and partial loss of the dam. The bottom left is a pipe that you can see that a good part of the bottom of the pipe is not there anymore. And on the right, this is where, even though we had a concrete vertical riser, the horizontal pipe was metal. That metal pipe collapsed, and this had been a wet pond with a permanent pool of water. Pretty much as soon as this pond failed, we lost a portion of the dam and all of the water drained out. So just to sum up, failure to act results in a number of things. There's the potential for emergency roadway closures. A lot of our dams use public roads as the embankment. There's the potential for property damage, personal injury, environmental degradation, and the additional direct and indirect costs from such a failure. And that's all I've got. So I'll turn it back to Holly and just any questions folks may have.
And thank you, Mark, and also Zark. And regarding stormwater, one thing I want to add to what just Mark said is that in the past several years, I think starting from 2014, the county stormwater needs has mostly been rely on a revenue source called a watershed protection fee, sometimes called stormwater utility fee there. That has been used to issue stormwater backed fee-backed bonds as well as cash pay-go, and that actually has largely been exhausted. So in other words, starting from now to the next 20 years, if we continue to use that structure of funding, it means that we will probably have to do nothing rather than what Mark just mentioned, that close to 16.5 million on average just to address the ongoing needs there and deferred maintenance there. Or we have to switch those to general fund for geo bonds. So that will be another element that we have to keep in mind that add to the challenges for not only 24 but also future years, because this needs there, which I mean the county has been doing hard to address, is continue to grow, but also its dedicated source is essentially have been depleted by this time. So in other words, there's still revenues coming from that dedicated fund, but that's just enough to pay historical debt. So it doesn't have any new capacity for the future years to do anything at this point. So that's another challenge there. Thank you. We're open to questions, and we can take about 10 minutes or address a few questions, and we'll move to a next speaker.
Hi, Holly, and thanks, Mark. Quick question, Mark. The stormwater ponds that you referenced, I'm assuming they're the multi-site or the major stormwater ponds. Are you including the micro bioretention ponds that are now local in all new single family development? And what's the inspection regime on those, and how's that progressing?
The numbers I gave you were basically for the larger infrastructure, excuse me, and wouldn't include the smaller micro bioretentions, the rain gardens and such. The majority of the more recent pest management practices aren't ponds, they're the smaller facilities that you referenced. And I'd say a majority of those are privately owned and maintained. So we don't have a lot of county-owned rain barrels, rain gardens, small infrastructure like that. And so, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that much I kind of expected. I guess the real question is there's literally thousands of them now through the county. What's the inspection regime on them? Do you have the staff you need to do it? And I would expect that there'd be a really high level of failure in those ponds over time, because that obviously they're not metal, they're not even metal, let alone concrete.
Right.
And people just fill them in. They don't even know what they are.
Yeah, so we do have sufficient staff at this point to keep up with doing the inspections. They're part of the triennial inspections. I have 4 inspectors in my division, as well as we have 2 consultants that we contract out to. So between that group, we stay current with our triennial inspections for every facility, whether it's a rain garden, a rain barrel, or a large pond or Centennial Lake. Most of the smaller infrastructure that you mentioned is relatively new, so we haven't seen failures on those, but we certainly will pick up on our inspections. Will pick up on the water's not draining, the vegetation's dead, there's a sediment buildup. Those deficiencies are sent to the facility owner, and they're required to address them. I will say that we've had, I don't know what percentage, but almost complete a positive response from the facility owners. Our recourse is to take people to court, and I think we've only done that once or twice, and that's for tens of thousands of these small facilities. So over time, I would probably agree with you that they will start clogging up, they will start holding sediment, and will need to be addressed. But for the most part, those would fall on the actual property owner. You mentioned people filling them in. We have that as well, and we've had them put them back the way they're supposed to be, with the threat of fines in court. And again, I think I can only think of twice when we've had to go to court. People aren't happy, but they understand that they have to do what they have to do.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you both, Mark and Zark, and also for your whole team for working very diligently. These are really important projects there. That's not only for now, but also for the future's long term, like life quality, because of all those needs that doesn't go away. Yes, thank you very much. I'll move to next speaker, and then I think it's community college. So let me pull it on the screen. All right. So
Can you hear me, Holly?
yes, I can. Go
Okay.
ahead. Thank you.
All right. Hi. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lynn Coleman. I'm the Vice President of Administration and Finance at Howard Community College, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the college and our capital budget needs. If you can go on to the next slide. Everything we do guides us by our mission, vision, values, and strategic goals. And our mission of providing pathways to success is our way of helping our county residents and our students move forward in their careers. Since our new president, Dr. Willis, started, we have done a number of things with our strategic goals, reorganizing our academic areas, reducing our 5 deans down to 3, and also in student success, we've done a lot of reorganization to make sure we are serving students. The next slide, please. Our core competencies help us promote our providing exceptional educational experiences and facilitating student success, along with partnering with other organizations to move our mission forward. Next slide. This past fall, our enrollment, you will see about 78% are part-time students. So that's very important because most of our students really are working 2 and 3 jobs, going to school, and it takes some time for them to complete their classes, a lot longer than it would at a normal institution. And you will see that our credit area had about 12,900 students last year, and our non-credit area had about 10,000. So 23,000, almost 100 students were attending our college last year. Moving on, when you look at residents in Howard County attending college, 32% of all Howard County residents attending undergraduate institutions are at Howard Community College. And our next slide shows our business model, which is we are an open access institution, which means that students who come to us at our varying levels of readiness and academic experience, and we have diverse learning options for our students, face-to-face, hybrid, online at your time, and online scheduled remote. So these are some of the options students have at our campus. Our next slide sort of shows one of the issues that we're facing. Our financial aid, 47% of our students receive financial aid, and 52% of those students are below the poverty line. The United Ways of Maryland published a report in 2020 that examined households that experience financial hardship, known as the ALICE report, or short for Asset Limited, Incomes Constrained, and Employed. And 28% of households in Howard County, are about 116,000, were working but unable to make ends meet. And so we're trying to offer opportunities for students and residents of our county to get ahead. So now I'm going to go to the next slide about our capital budget, and we have a couple of projects I wanted to talk about. The first project that's currently under construction is our mathematics and athletics complex. It's slated to open in the spring of 2025, and this facility will be approximately 163,000 square feet. The mathematics division is currently housed in a former office building that's 36 years old. And this year, our current athletic facility will be 54 years old and really needs to be replaced. So we anticipate, we've been doing this project in phases, and in March of this year, we will be demolishing the current building in phase 2 of the project. And we try to combine, everybody says, why math and athletics? Those were two major needs that we had on our campus, and we felt it was important to conserve county funds. And so that's why we combined the building into two disciplines into one building. This year is the last year that we will be asking the county money for this project. And so it was 26.7 million with the final phase of construction, but the county pays half of that and the state pays half. So on all of our building projects, not our deferred maintenance, but all of our building projects, the state does pay 50% and the county pays 50% on those projects. So that's 26 is divided into half by both. And move on to the next slide. Our next request is about we're going to be talking about a trades building, and what we had developed in 2019 was our pathways into occupational areas. We started out with just 12 apprentices, and then the number of apprentices has grown in just 4 years to 101. That's an increase of about 742%. And that's important because we could see the need in our county of our residents wanting to take trades and develop skills. We move on to the next slide. You can see that many, as I mentioned earlier, are attending part-time. They're working to pay for their education and increasingly turning to financial aid to get by. And even though we had our apprentice programs, many of those are offered at the site of the employers, and we have been approached by a number of contractors to help get more students trained and into our workforce pipeline. We need to expand our reach into educating our community residents for the trades. And so currently Maryland is experiencing labor shortages in all skilled trade occupations, such as automotive, electrical, plumbing, manufacturing, and logistics, and we want to offer high quality jobs for our residents who are seeking to attain an education and all to support their families. We can move on to the next slide. We're requesting funding for the trades building, and the college is asking the county to start the building, the planning. It's 3.9 million, about 4 million. And we also are searching for funds going to match that to start the building. Because of space limitations in the college's facility, a skills trade program needs a separate facility of its own so students can work in the trades and practice in those areas. And so that's why we're asking for a smaller building. It's only about 25,000 square feet to help with promoting trades in our county. To the next slide, what you will see, our neighboring community colleges have trade centers or integrated facilities that handle trades and provide training on campus. When you look around, besides Howard County and Baltimore City, we're the only county without a trade center in the region. All of the surrounding community colleges, starting with Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, Montgomery, Frederick, Carroll, and Prince George's, all have trade centers where their residents are able to go for in-county tuition there. And Warwick is currently, which is on the Eastern Shore, is currently building a trade center as well. So we are just trying to help get caught up with some of our neighboring counties so our residents have options. If we go to the next slide, our president had met someone recently. He's a contractor. He has a business here in Howard County. He runs a solar business, but he currently has to send his trainees to Pennsylvania for training. And we want to bring those students back to our county so they can get trained here without having to go out of state to be trained. If you look at the cost of the building, what we're saying is it's in FY24, we're asking the county for about a little less than 4 million. And then in phase 2, we were going to ask from the county and the state about $8 million each to help with that. And Echo Works is also going to be working with us in this project for the building, which is in total about 23 million. In addition to that, we also have systemic renovations that's the next slide. Systemic renovations, it's about $1 million request. We have a 10-year list of deferred maintenance that we continually update. The state helps with some of these projects, but they do not necessarily help with the full 50% as they do on other capital projects. So that's how why we need continued support from the county for deferred maintenance. We go to the summary slide on all of this. Basically, we're asking, the next slide shows a summary of all our capital projects. And basically, with the MAC building, we're asking the 3.3 million for the MAC, 3.9 million on the trades building, and 1 million on deferred maintenance. So it's a total of 18 million from the county, and 3.3 million from the state, and 3.9 for other sources, for a total of $35 million with our total capital budget. Recently, the college got one of the largest private donations in the college's history, $2 million from the Kahlert Foundation, and our president continues to look to other businesses to help with funding things on our campus. Other recent awards that we've just received: the National Center of Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense, the National Center of Digital Forensics, and we also have gotten an award from the state for our career and technical education to help with our plumbing apprenticeship, which is held at the vendor site. When one looks at the return on investment for for the college, our graduates earn about $363,000 more than they would if they had their high school diploma or GED. They get a 14.5% return on their investment, and our taxpayers actually get a 1.5% return on their contribution. So overall, we are able to promote the county and increase jobs by about 4,600. And this is going forward. So, I mean, this is currently in place. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to talk about the colleges and investment that we feel will ensure all residents, no matter their income, have the opportunity to transform their lives through education and find their own pathways to success. So I tried to do that very succinctly. So I'm finished with my presentation and ready for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lynn, and very nice to see you. Also, by the way, for folks here there, Lynn has been a committee member for many years. I know this year there's a transition internally. We are very happy to see you present to this committee again. Again, if anyone has questions, this is time to ask. Thank you.
Lynn, Todd Arterburn here. The numbers were going by pretty quick, but tell me if I've got this right. It was 25,000 square foot building for the trades building.
Yes.
And I think the total cost, based on what you were suggesting, was 24 million, including basically half and half, county and non-county funding.
The state will match 50% on our buildings. Yes.
So, and does the 24 million include any land acquisition, or is that already in-house?
No, we're going to, well, what right now, we have two options that we're looking at, and we haven't finally developed them. One is a possible land acquisition, but the other is to build it on our campus. So that's where we have not finalized the studies on that, but we do have space on our campus. One concern that we have, it's going to be built on a parking lot, and then we got to a point, at one point we had to build garages because we were, full. So that's why we're looking, just going to do a study whether it should be on our property or another area.
So the 24 million does not include any either parking additions or land acquisition?
It does include some cost for a study for land acquisitions, but not the total. No, not the total land acquisition itself.
Not the acquisition itself, or,
Yes,
or any necessary parking increases. And does anybody?
And the spaces that we were looking at were close to the college, so that's why we were hoping that students could park on our campus and possibly walk to the other location. But that hasn't, as I said, that hasn't been determined yet.
So whatever costs associated with either one or both of those things would be in addition to the 24 million.
If we have to acquire land, if we do build it on our campus, and we do have a site that we have looked at on our campus that it can be built on, then we won't have to acquire land.
Right. And then I guess the final question is I don't know what that's roughly $1,000 a square foot, right? So how does that track with what the school system is currently building
One of
with
the things with
1,000?
the trades building, it's not quite the same as our regular classroom building. So I don't know what the school system charges per square. I mean, it has to pay per square foot. But when you have a trade center, a lot of the rooms are not really finished rooms because technically the students are in there practicing, building things. And so what our intent was, and the reason to keep it close to campus, is so that they could come on campus and use our classrooms for when they're in actual sitting areas, where they're sitting taking classes versus working in the trades, where the trades building is mainly open spaces where they have built like temporary walls for things that they can tear down and put up as they work on different projects.
Which might argue that then your cost per square foot is lower because you don't have as many individual interior build out issues that you would with the schools.
The regular classrooms, yes.
Yeah, and I just don't know if that's $1,000 a square foot is a big number or a small number. I have no idea. But just noted it's almost exactly $1,000 a foot based on
we had priced it based on other schools because there's also a lot of equipment that needs to go in there. So it's not just the building itself. It really is equipment that we will have to have like bays for. If we have automotive, there need to be bays and things like that in there too. So that's included as part of this too.
How does that compare to your math and athletic center? Now, that's a vastly different type of building. I get it, but just out of curiosity.
Well, the math and athletic center, part of the center is like open space because we have 2 gyms in there now versus the math rooms, which have a lot of AV and other equipment in there to operate.
Hello?
Hello, I'm
Yeah. Todd, the school is going to present their budget on the January 31st because superintendent's proposed budget was rescheduled, the release of his budget. So both operating and CIP, we cover them. I think that would be a good question if you want to raise there. Just ask the school folks about their construction per square footage on that. Okay, thank you, Lynn and Todd, for discussion. And I think originally I had a question, but I think you already addressed that, is that the workforce that it sounds like it cannot be accommodated by existing buildings there, because that's original my question there. You were saying that the current space is not enough to accommodate the needs.
Yeah, the current the apprenticeship programs that we have, they actually are held at the employer's location. So those are not on campus right now. So none of our apprenticeships are on campus at the current time. But if we want to expand the program, technically those students in the apprenticeships are actually being paid by the employer and also taking classes on the employer's site. But we're trying to build something on our campus so that students, just like at other community colleges, because if our students wanted to go to any of these other surrounding community colleges, they actually have to pay out-of-county tuition, which is a lot more expensive than coming to your in-county college to take classes.
Do we have any information on how for-profit trades and technical education centers are doing, like Lincoln Tech, which is the other side of the county?
For some of the programs that we're talking about here, Lincoln Tech charges about $24,000 for a student to go there, where at Howard it's about $5,100 to come to take classes here. And that's why we're trying to build something for our residents that's a little bit more economical for them. because the state and the county help participate in the funding classes.
Does Lincoln Tech have excess capacity that we might be able to tap into rather than build new buildings?
We haven't talked to them about that. No, we haven't talked to them.
Okay, thanks.
This is Richard. I've studied this stuff a lot, and I've never actually ever heard nationally of a community college teaming with a for-profit training institute. I'm not saying it's never happened. I'm just saying I've never once heard of it.
Yeah, I think that's something, I mean, some of the questions there, and thank you, Dr. Clinch. I think some of the questions Todd raised there is a good point there is, again, obviously in an ideal world, we will try to fund everything, and people asked on that there, and this is obviously workforce development is really important issue for the county and for a lot of other places, and there's a lot of good argument there. It's more like if by any chance they're not having the level of funding or that faster, if we want to address whether there's other opportunity and some of the partnership or other, at least that's maybe options worth exploration, may or may not be need that, but eventually could use that or in between before you materialize the new buildings here. But obviously, I'm not speaking for the county executive, so everything obvious is subject for discussion on that. But I just like I think in a realistic world, we do have to look at different options here and explore that.
Holly, can I just add on? This is Ellen. Just add on that the apprentice programs that were discussed, those are also being pursued at the K through 12 level. These apprentices where they're actually on the sites of the employers and they're actually being paid and get benefits. The state has a commitment, at least professed, that 40% of high school students will graduate with professional certification to go into trades beyond what's happening at what those that are on a more maybe previously conventional college level path. It doesn't mean that workforce development through the community college isn't a logical place for some of that to go. But the program has been growing over the last couple of years. Issues, as with everything, revolve around transportation and access and working to build out those. But I think there will be a concerted support from the Department of Commerce and Labor at the state level, as well as the Department of Education, to push for these kinds of opportunities because of the lack of a labor force to fill the jobs that are available. So both at the K through 12 level, or at least at the public school level, community college, and private partnerships with some of the unions and the associations for the trades are certainly in the works and options to pursue for partnerships.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. And one of our team member from Public Works also mentioned that they actually in DPW also has as apprentice program. So it sounds like they possibly, and again, it's also a lot of a detailed discussion. It could be some forms of partnership across different institutions there, possibly.
Yeah, the school system. Yeah, the school system is actually employing some of the apprentices that are in their program. So the same thing is happening within other government. I'm just saying that this is a push at not just the community college level, but a commitment by the state to increase these opportunities and make sure that what were certainly identified during COVID as essential workers are being developed, and that those career paths are being made more accessible. So, so how this may turn out versus what it was conventionally and where it's going, I think there are some options to explore. That's all.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. And also, I just saw a comment from Jolene from our Board of Ed, who's also a committee member, mentioned that there might be some collaboration opportunity because HCPS L Beauty also needs renovation for similar programs. It could be a partnership maybe with a community college to tap into the usage of that, maybe jointly. So these are all really good thoughts on that. Thanks everybody for your input on that.
Well, actually, regionally, it already is a partnership between HCC and the school system. That's how the regional direction is done, because clearly it doesn't end with 12th grade. It has to move forward. So just
Right.
reinforce.
I do know that the person who's working on a lot of our apprenticeships has also been in contact with a number of people at the public school system about joint partnerships together. So that conversation is definitely happening.
Oh, we actually meet. I serve on that. I serve on that committee. So yeah, we, as a regional plan for the state of Maryland, that's the way that it coordinates, because it's recognizing that it doesn't end at high school, it doesn't end at community college. There has to be a pathway to go through all of that. So I'm just saying that that's another place to be looking where some of this may be picked up. That's all.
Right. And also, I think I have to say that we'll look at all kinds of partnership. Looks like that's a opportunity there. But in terms of the emphasis, that's really the right emphasis, the workforce development, and also more strengthening apprentice program in general for the county. That's definitely the right direction, and will help address some the long-term needs there. It's just more how to do it and how to partner and also mitigate costs. That's a main thought on that. Well, thank you everyone. I want to and thank you Lynn very much. I want to move on to our colleagues at library. So Angela, can you
Yes.
share from your place there, or can our IT host authorize Angela to show her slides?
Okay. I think I'm showing mine now.
Yeah, it's up. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. So, well, thank you, thank you everyone very much, and thank you, Holly. It's glad to be able to present and share with what the library is, a little bit about the library. I first want to apologize. Tonya Akins, it was called away this morning to another matter, so I'm presenting on behalf of Tonya and myself. So I'll make the presentation brief and go through some of the details. But again, she is sorry she couldn't be here this morning. I'm going to start with a snapshot of the library system and a little bit of what we are doing. As you may know, we are focused on, as always, is focused on delivering high quality education for all. And we are a vital part of the educational system in Howard County. We do that through our pillars, through self-directed education, through research assistance and instruction, through enlightening experiences and community response outlook. The red areas that you'll see noted there are red because we are, that's the area where we see some challenges. We have materials, and we'll talk a little bit about those, e-resources. These are all hot spots for us that are very popular, even Project Literacy and the Homework Club. We're seeing challenges in terms of the community demand as it is outpacing what the funding that we have to provide these services to our community. So I'll go to the next slide. Some of the areas in which we're seeing the outpacing is insufficient space and materials to meet the demand. Classes, for us right now, we are seeing our class numbers going back to pre-pandemic levels. So we are seeing where classes are going back to at least when we had pre-pandemic levels, where we would have, I think it was 1.4 million classes, and we believe we will be on track for that again. For the classes, 1.4 million attendance, I'm sorry, in classes, we see that again. For materials, we have deep wait list, and we are seeing where customers are having to wait longer. Right now, pre-pandemic, we saw where the codes were going upwards of 10,000 books a month being satisfied. Right now, we're at 6. Just because of what's available to us. We are on track for overall borrowing of 1.4. I'm sorry, 4.3. So we're on track for 4.3 this year. A lot of that is due because of publisher increases and lending the way we're able to lend. Our spaces, again, we are seeing an increase uptick in our spaces from where we were pre-pandemic. And of course, we know that Central has some of the most constrained spaces that are available. So I talked about materials. I'm going to talk about Spare. Spare is one, as you know, just came out, or you may know. That is a book where we have 90 copies and we have 227 requests. The number is growing every day. We fill these requests and as best we can. But like as I mentioned, our holds right now, we are fulfilling holds at about 6,000 a month. And that's a little bit under where we'd like to be. But again, we continue to see the demand. For capital projects, the current branch right now, our current capital project that we are projecting for 2024 is the Central Branch. The current space is slated for alternative use in the DRA. We do have insufficient staff, as I mentioned, but I mean, space at Central. We have classes where people have to share or people are turned away. It doesn't meet the current state standards of 1.4 per capita. And then there is significant growth anticipated for downtown. And we do know that we've got increased community asking for space. Again, this is a community resource, so we are there and we have to often tell people you can't go there, you'll have to go somewhere else, or we just don't have it. And so, of course, we are looking at, as we mentioned in a prior year, you may remember, looking at developing a new space. For downtown, our new branch is we've done through a planning process or a strategic plan, and it called for 100,000 square feet of additional space downtown. We believe downtown is centrally located and it's an educational resource for all. So we're very excited about the downtown branch and we envision it as a community space, a destination. What is really notable about downtown Columbia is that as we do the branch and look at the branch for downtown, that branch will not require any additional staffing at all. We are using existing staffing for the central branch. And so we don't anticipate any increase in that area. Again, we are looking at a space downtown and we are looking at having residential included. And I went through it pretty fast, but I just wanted to make sure we met our time constraint, but we also answered any questions that people may have.
Thank you, Angela. One quick question there. I know the Downtown Columbia Library, the idea started quite some time ago, and actually the early planning and we started or even started designing is before the pandemic started there. So, last a couple of years, people's the way of working and meeting or changed there. So, more virtual meetings, more digital reading. Does that have any impact, or have you guys been incorporate that in the revisit or the design or any updates of the design in terms of the needs of the $100,000 square foot?
We have we look at all of that. When we look at our numbers, we look at how many are coming in the door, how many people are projecting. We've taken consideration virtual meetings and online classes that we still offer. We have seen a continued increase in all. And that is really what's amazing. So we do believe this space, we will still need 100,000 square feet based on not just the analysis done in 2019, but the fact that our numbers are returning are really back to that levels, pre-pandemic levels in terms of on-site. In some cases, we've seen increases in community spaces, and just what you're talking about, where people are may have been looking for virtual spaces during the pandemic. A lot of people are back looking at and doing classes in person. And so we see the numbers coming back up significantly. I think last year we reported, and we see it as similar, is that the request for community space is up 300% to where it was even in 2019 or 2018. So we are looking at those numbers constantly and trying to provide the best to the community and make sure they have not just the best space, but they have adequate space. when we originally looked at some of the classes that we had, our classes have gone up. So for instance, for project literacy, where there's always a hold list, we have seen an increase in online for project literacy as well as in-person project literacy. So this semester at Project Literacy, we've got about 240 students, and there's still some that are waiting, they can't get in. That's an increase over what we used to be able to see. So some people can learn virtually and online, but a lot of students and of all ages still like to learn in person. For our events and for our classes and A+, we see again an increase. Battle of the Books is one of our programs, as you know. We've got 322 teams this year. So, and it involves every school. All the schools have between 3 and 5 teams coming to participate. So it's not just looking at materials. We're looking at materials. We're looking at attendance. We look at demand. And we're happy to say that people are coming back and are fully engaged and coming back stronger than ever. But a very good question.
Thank you, Angela. Any other questions?
I was anticipating a question on Southwest Branch. People usually ask that question. So I'll go ahead and answer those who have inquiring minds about it. We are approaching Central because of the urgency of downtown, but also for Southwest, that project is further out for us. We have chosen to look at Central first because we know that Southwest would require additional staffing and that finding that location will take additional time. So it is a future down the road, but the urgent for this year and next year is definitely Central.
Yeah, that library, I think, is in your multi-year plan, right? In your 6-year plan.
It is. It is there.
Yeah. And that was
question for those.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask which location is actually Southwest Branch. I don't necessarily know them all by. I know more by places than I do by. I guess West Central or whatever. So what's Southwest?
It's okay. It's actually, there's not a Southwest Branch, so there's not a way to know where it is. So thank you for that question.
Okay.
No, thank you for that question. We call it a future Southwest Branch, but it refers to the Fulton area.
Yeah, hi, Holly. Steve Hunt here. Morning. Yeah, I was going to ask the question. For the Southwest locations that you brought it up, is there a site that has already been selected? Is there an idea of, if not, is there an idea of where you would want it? I know you mentioned Fulton, but is there a target location for this future site?
There is not. We don't have one. We did some community charrettes, as you may remember, and got community input, and we have looked around. But what we would start with in the multi-year plan, we would definitely start that building like we have other buildings. We would start with a site review, and we would then try to find a location. But that's part of the project, and that would be in future years.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, Angela.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks everybody for the questions there. We'll move to Dr. Irani. Would you like to run from your side, or you would want me to run the slides, Dr. Irani? I think you're muted. I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to run it from your screen?
Actually, could you run it from your screen, please?
Okay. So the host, can you, yeah, great. All right, go ahead.
All right, well, good morning. Thank you for having me speak. I guess I'm between you and the end of this meeting, so I will certainly be quick with it.
It looks like I have a little bit issue there. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
So it goes without saying the economy has gone through a lot since March of 2020, and for the most part, we have seen recovery in most sectors. There are still some areas that are still challenging to us. Labor markets, in particular, supply chain, it still remains an issue. Inflation, energy, and then also compounding this is recently a divided Congress, which would have probably a more adverse effect on Maryland than, say, other states. And then obviously, clearly, an ongoing war in the Ukraine. Um, Slow the slides, please. One thing is, we've followed through this Jumanji theme because again, as the game sort of indicates, it is a surprise. This is the video version, sort of indicating that it is a new thing. Next slide. One of the things I'm going to talk about today is talk about the national economy. I'm going to focus on the expenditure side. So when we think about gross domestic product, the final value of all goods and services produced in the U.S. in a given time period, it's really composed of consumption expenditures, investment expenditures, government expenditures, and net exports. Next slide. So, we've seen some solid growth. We had 2 quarters prior of less than positive growth, though a recession has not been called. The economy still continues to outperform expectations given sort of all that's been thrown at it. Next slide. As I've said, we're a nation of see it, want it, buy it. 70% of our economic activity is driven by household behavior, and households tend to feel okay about the economy, not as strong as perhaps they should be. We'll get some better data at the end of this month regarding sort of fourth quarter expenditures. But it was it was good, but it wasn't as good as it could be. Next slide. This is business investments, or this is all expenditures associated with anything that is used to provide, produce, or transport a good or a service. This also includes housing starts, and I will say, we've seen that decline, which also can explain partially why this number has declined as well. So it is a bit concerning because, again, this is sort of everything from inventories to basically factories investing in new trucks or new plants or new machinery. And again, some of that may also be tied up with supply chain challenges as well. Next slide. Again, government spending has ticked up a bit. The Build Back Better has yet to sort of fully been realized. We are still lower than we were in the pandemic, but higher than we were in pre-pandemic, obviously. So we're spending a bit more dollars. Next slide. Our trade deficit has decreased, about $1.3 trillion. It's significantly higher than it was even during the 2020s. Even pre-pandemic, almost a 50% increase in the trade deficit. Though we did see exports increase slightly, and imports decrease. But generally speaking, the trade deficit has been increasing going forward. Next slide. And just to kind of bring it home a little bit, Maryland's GDP did grow as compared to prior quarters where it did shrink. So this is certainly a good sign for Maryland's economy in the third quarter. Next slide. So consumer sentiment, this is out of the University of Michigan consumer sentiment study. And again, 100 sort of is the baseline level. And as you can sort of see that even during the pandemic, consumers for the most part, probably because they were able to work from home in their pajamas for many people, were pretty happy. But since then, combining with higher prices, war in Ukraine, some divisive perhaps divisive politics, higher prices for housing. Consumer sentiment has dropped significantly, but we have seen an uptick. Most recent data does show that it has increased. Next slide. The labor market nationally remains very strong, and even locally here, as you can sort of see, the unemployment rate was about 3.5%. We're at pre-pandemic levels in terms of unemployment. Again, this is a bit of a misleading statistic. So to be defined as unemployed, you are going to be actively seeking work in the last week. So if you're not looking for work and you're not actively looking for work, you're out of the labor force, which means you're no longer counted as unemployed. So you could have very low unemployment by the fact that the labor force is shrinking. I'll talk a little bit about that on the next couple of slides. Next slide. So obviously inflation has been sort of a critical factor, though one thing we've seen the last 3 months is sort of a slight decline in inflation, which is certainly good news for consumers, though some areas remain high. Housing, eggs remain high, as we've seen. Next slide. Oh, next slide. So we've seen sort of the CPI again for the U.S. as well as the Baltimore, Columbia, Townsend MSA. Both have sort of flattened or plateaued most recently, which is certainly good news. Next slide. But wages. Wages have sort of struggled to keep up with the inflation rates going forward. So many households, even in spite of the fact of getting raises, their raises have yet to be able to keep up with the rate of inflation. Next slide.
Oh, Dr. Ronnie, can I have a clarification question there? So the green line is the median weekly earnings. That's the percentage, or it's absolute dollar? It's a percentage.
It's percentage growth.
So that's actually still negative growth for the median weekly.
It's increasing it's increasing in real terms.
Okay, so it's in real term, but so it's actually improving, but not before pandemic, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, we've seen that we've read the headlines. Obviously the human toll is tragic. The political geopolitical implications are terrible. But from an economics point of view, both Ukraine and Russia are significant producers of grain and corn, wheat and corn, excuse me, as well as fertilizer. And so that has raised, has caused huge amounts of disruption in the global economy. You think about eggs as sort of being a good indicator. Everything from corn feed for chickens has gone up tremendously, as well as diesel or gas to transport the goods has gone up significantly. We've also seen, a significant reduction in oil production, though I think Russia is about 10% of world oil production going forward. Next slide. And this kind of shows sort of the how much they make up of wheat and corn, 30 to 18% for global for wheat and corn exports in the U.S. And obviously this also means that basically in the U.S. Because wheat and corn are global, has also caused price pressures to go up in both of those. So everything from, and corn is a major input into many things, everything from corn syrup, to actual corn itself, all to feed, all has gone up significantly over the last year and a half. Next slide. Cars, again, if you go any car dealer lot, there may be a few more cars, but we've generally seen significant increases. Right now, the average price of a new car is about $46,000. We're seeing an increasing percentage of households with $1,000 per month car note. So that's sort of a significant. There has been, electric vehicle sales have grown while we've seen some the combustion engine sales have actually slowed a bit. going forward, but generally speaking, car sales have been been a bit been challenging for consumers. For dealers, we're seeing significant markups with car sales, oftentimes, $5,000 to $50,000 in markup for some of these cars. Next slide. Supply chain, so we're looking at 23 is going to be challenging. Obviously, we've seen the news from China, 60,000 deaths from COVID. Obviously, that's going to have an impact. We've seen the slowing birth rate in China. That's going to have an impact. We've seen the impact of COVID in terms of their economic growth. But generally speaking, we still continue to expect to see supply chain issues impact. Computer chips still tend to be challenged to get, but everything that shipping delays again. Our trucking, the average age of truckers is increasing. We're not replacing them at a fast enough rate, so that continues to be an ongoing challenge. Next slide. Obviously, gas prices have gone down, but we've generally seen crude oil has dropped significantly. This is also a bit concerning, right? So one of the challenges for many producers of oil is, there's a tipping point at which it makes sense for them to invest in continuous production or increase production, but also then the challenge is if there's volatility in the energy market, they may choose not to produce. So one of the concerns we have here in the U.S. is many wells remain unutilized because of the volatility in energy prices. So we have seen natural gas prices have increased in the U.S. Next slide. Obviously, the U.S. has drawn down some of its strategic petroleum reserve to kind of help stabilize the price. It is, at one of its lowest rates. Next slide. Obviously, this translates to some good news for consumers. It has declined after peaking in June, but generally speaking, the energy prices will probably begin to ticking up a bit, but not as much as they were before. Next slide. Interest rates, obviously the Fed will meet and they will probably be increasing, they will be increasing interest rates. The question is, will they be increasing by 0.25% basis points or 0.50? I think consensus is probably going to be 0.50 basis points, given the fact that that inflation has slowed down. Next slide. You can sort of see the rapid rise in inflation. And I also should point out that, interest rates and federal fund rates have been at or near zero for a significant portion of the last 12 years. The exception being sort of in the 16 where it's at 2.5. So we're entering into a sort of, I don't want to say a normal interest rate environment, but generally speaking, it's no longer going to be zero as it was after the Great Recession or after COVID. We're generally seeing, interest rates rise, which has all kinds of ramifications. As our prior presenters talked about, the cost of borrowing has gone up, which means that projects have also gone up, which means that for the foreseeable future, we expect to see that those costs will probably be higher than they were if they had been started in 2009. Next slide. We saw some inversion we're seeing some inversion of the long-term and short-term interest rates as we go forward. So there's a bit of concern of the future of the economy, but generally speaking, you can sort of see that generally an upward trend of long-term and short-term interest rates going forward. Next slide. Mortgage rates did peak sometime in October. Obviously there's a big concern as interest rates rise. It means housing affordability does go down. There was a presentation on the fiscal impact, and obviously, we have experienced for many years, almost a decade, of sub 4% mortgage rates, and now we're entering into somewhere between a 5 and 7% mortgage rates as we go forward, which has significant impacts on the housing affordability for many households and the decision to buy or not to buy. Next slide. And as I mentioned before, some of the decline in the in business investment is being sparked by the fact that housing starts has declined, which basically means we're running out of housing. Now, what does this mean? So one of the challenges is coming out of the Great Recession. You can sort of see we're building just north of 2 million units per year. We've dropped to 500,000 units per year. We've never made up that loss in units, which means that we as a nation still struggle with about 5 million unit shortage of housing across the board, which means that housing prices, are more a reflection of the supply constraints rather than some of the demand increases that are going on. So this remains a big challenge both here in Maryland as well as nationally. Next slide. As you can sort of see, housing prices have leveled off a little bit in the three major areas, but generally speaking, they are trending up since 18. Next slide, please. And just kind of put it at home here, we've kind of mapped out nationwide since over the last 4 years, 2018, 2022, statewide, almost a 31% increase in home prices. And as you can sort of see across the board, we've generally seen some significant increases in home prices. Howard County being sort of one of the lower ones at almost 28% below the state average, whereas St. Mary's County at nearly 77% increase overall in home prices. But generally speaking, home prices have gone up, and along with that, monthly rental has also gone up for many households, which put them in a very significant disadvantage. Next slide, please. Labor force participation. So one of the big challenges I mentioned before, unemployment rate has gone down, both here in Maryland as well as nationally. But Maryland is still a little higher than the national average. But one of the things to consider is the labor force is defined as those individuals who are employed plus those individuals who are unemployed. And to be unemployed, you're actively looking for work. If you're not actively looking for work, you're no longer unemployed. And if you're not employed, you're no longer in the labor force. So the idea being is that we could actually see a lowering of unemployment by the fact that people are dropping out of looking for work, and actually that causes the labor force to shrink. So, that is something that has been ongoing in Maryland as well as the U.S. Next slide. We still are seeing sort of a gap between the number of job openings versus the number of individuals actively looking for work in the U.S. So it is a gap that continues to persist. It did persist pre-pandemic, though not to the extent as it exists now. Next slide. And we see it in Maryland as well, though the number of job openings and unemployed people are actually closing in on each other. So perhaps there will be a situation in which in Maryland, at least, there may be more unemployed individuals and job openings. And next slide, please. This is sort of think about 2.31 jobs per individual, per unemployed person by statewide. It varies by county. And a lot of this is a reflection of the fact that there may be jobs in the county, but there may be individuals who are working in another county, another state. So, this slide just kind of gives the fact that Maryland is a small state. There is a lot of movement between counties, but generally speaking, look at Howard County at 6.29 job openings for unemployed individuals. It may be that the type of jobs in those areas are probably going to be in the hospitality industry, restaurants, logistics, some of the trades, and many individuals who live and work who live in Howard County are prone to work in other counties in IT, and health professions, other things. So many of the job openings at Howard County are probably going to be filled by individuals who are coming in from Baltimore County, Baltimore City, or Anne Arundel, or Prince George's for that matter. Next slide. The Great Resignation is sort of tempered out a little bit. It's not as growth that we saw in the summer or earlier this year, or earlier last year, I should say. But generally speaking, quit rates still remain pretty high, but they are kind of slowing down. Next slide. And this is sort of the one thing I should point out. This is sort of a critical thing. So what we've seen is the labor force participation rate, which is individuals who are in the labor force, and to be in the labor force, you are employed or unemployed. And this number is divided by the number of individuals 16 to 64. And this number has gone down dramatically. So it was in the nationally for Maryland, it was in the high 60s, probably 69%. It's dropped down to about 66%, 67%. So about a 2.5% drop. It's not recovered since the pandemic. So we're still operating a lot. So there are fewer workers in the labor force. And there could be everything. A lot of this is driven by the fact that we've seen a tremendous drop in affordable, available childcare. So many households, who might be willing to work in some of the lower wage industries can't find affordable childcare, even though the state does provide a scholarship for those individuals. That's been an issue. Some individuals decided they would take early retirement. They saw their 401k and their home prices increase, so they decided they would just go ahead and cash out. Some individuals have long COVID, so have sort of dropped out of the labor market until their health recovers. So there's a lot of factors going on, and there just doesn't be one silver bullet that would explain why we're seeing that. One of the challenges, especially in the restaurant and hospitality industry, is uncertainty of scheduling, which has also led to the fact that if you are able to get childcare, you want to make sure you're able to preserve that. So there's a lot of factors compounding, but this is sort of at the heart of some of the challenges that many business owners are facing. There are just fewer workers out there who are willing to, who are in the labor force. And so this is kind of an ongoing thing that needs to be addressed and go forward. Next slide, please. You can sort of see for Maryland what the labor force participation rate has been. Surprisingly, Dorchester did see an increase in labor force participation rate, but generally speaking, we're seeing a tremendous drop. Statewide, about 2.4% decrease, but in Howard County at minus 2.7%. Those are going on. So across the board, with the exception of Dorchester, we are seeing a decrease in labor force participation rate. Fewer workers in the labor force who are working. Next slide. And you can sort of see the openings in our labor force. About 115,000 job openings. The vast majority are in sort of healthcare, IT. We're all getting older. We all need help getting around. From everything from physical therapy to additional care. And we're all prone to make, IT mistakes. So obviously we need individuals who are able to protect us from our mistakes in IT. But generally speaking, those tend to be the biggest openings. And I would argue that those openings were tremendously challenged even pre-pandemic. Now we layer on top of the fact that now we have a bit more telemedicine. We're doing much more virtual meetings. So that the additional need for IT individuals has only gone up. Next slide. I would like to say that Maryland is beds, meds, and feds, and generally speaking, that bears out when you look at the number of jobs in Maryland. Government tends to be our biggest employment, followed by healthcare, professional and scientific technical services, where all of our contractors hide out, and obviously accommodation and food services are the next business point. Retail trade also a significant point. But generally speaking, government tends to be our dominant employer here in Maryland. Next slide. And just kind of give you an idea of what tools are being needed. Obviously, motor vehicles and ladders are the non-IT portion of this, but generally speaking, of the top 10, 8 are in IT related type of skills that are needed. Next slide. I'll talk about this very briefly, but one of the things is, as mentioned in the new drain system for Ellicott City, we expect that not only is climate change here, but we're experiencing it both in the severity as well as the number of major weather events that are occurring here in Maryland as well as nationally. Next slide here. You're seeing billion-dollar disasters are an increasing frequency. So the frequency and severity of our storms are obviously going up over time. And you can sort of see by this graph that's showing what's going on in national. Next slide.
Let me just reopen it.
Okay.
I think there's a little memory issue. Let me reopen the file. Okay. More time. Okay. So let me try. Okay.
Okay, so obviously, just take an example. Whereas in Isaiah, again, $4.8 billion in damages. Again, we're seeing more and more of these. We saw recently in Florida a significant hurricane. Next slide, please. Again, wildfires, as a native Californian, you can definitely see that the wildfire season is no longer a season, it's basically an entire year in many cases. But it does have impact. So we think about California now, many of the mudslides and things that are going on are impacted by the fact that there were major fires, which had the ground barren. Again, all those things translate into higher insurance costs, which then translate into higher cost of billing for everywhere. Next slide, please. And we've seen, a warmer growing season here in the nation. Again, one of the challenges is it also encourages invasive species, weed growth, or an increased demand on irrigation. For Maryland, it does seem to be a bit of a challenge, but one of the things is it also can disrupt the structure of the region's ecosystem, which could then actually impact some of the native species here in Maryland. Next slide. And here in Maryland, just looking at this graph here, we looked at 20-year increments for coastal flooding, and you can sort of see Annapolis is in there represented. You can see up through about 2009, you had about maybe 2 floods per every 20 years. But then we go to 2010, 2020, just a 10-year increment, we had 8 floods, 10-year period. And it was just announced today that there's going to be a 2.5-foot high tide. So Annapolis is being under warning. So this is ongoing. So this means that basically for places like Ellicott City, where we expect to see, not only, it's not going to be a matter of if, it's going to be a matter of when. But obviously, everything is to be more resilient. Think about the additional costs we've had to incur as a state, as a county, to ensure that basically Ellicott City does not flood again. So those costs are going to be an ongoing cost for us as a county, state, and nation as we sort of contend with the fact that there are increasing changes in our climate, that are resulting in increasing flooding, increasing rain, increasing fires, all those types of things. Next slide. All right, next slide. So I'm wrapping it up here. I'm getting close to the end. So I kind of put it here, headwinds, obviously continuing war in Ukraine, slowing the world economy, obviously the decline in or the slowing in China is going to cause interest rate, is going to cause a concern, rising interest rates, inflation, though tempered now, volatility in the energy markets, divided Congress, supply chain challenges, climate change impacts, more frequent, more severe. Our tailwinds, we continue to still have a strong labor market. Rising consumer sentiment, obviously consumers being a bit more optimistic, declining gas prices for the most part, and there has been some softening of home prices, though we've not seen a decline in home prices. Next slide. So again, for Maryland, obviously, we are predicting a recession, whether it's going to be it's likely to be a short in duration and perhaps a mild recession that's going on in the economy. Uncertainty around the federal budget. So obviously the debt ceiling is we're approaching, as Secretary Yellen said on last week. January 19th is when we kind of end it. They can do some financial, finagling and get it last till June. But generally speaking, we have a divided Congress, which could then lead to either a debt ceiling showdown, which could then lead to a shutdown, as we've had in the past. Obviously, the challenges are in the budget at the end of September. Again, those are opportunities. Again, we might see some of those things. Higher natural gas prices could be a bit of a strain on Maryland's economy, especially if we have a cold winter. Thus far, our winter has been relatively mild. I was not here during December 20th through December 25th, so I didn't experience the 5-degree weather, but I heard it was really cold. And labor shortages will continue to plague hospitality establishments, in addition to IT, health, and transportation. I should add in there, construction also tends to be an area where we're seeing more retirement than new hires. So the trades are obviously impacted by that. I think that's the end. Thank you, Holly, for.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rani. These are really very informative. So we have several minutes left, so I want to open for questions here. So I can start. There's one question I have. I know it's really difficult to predict, but I'll just tell you one thing really. I'm concerned because it directly impacts the county's next year's revenue capacity as the housing market, right? Obviously, it's anybody's guess at this point, but recently we have been seeing not necessarily the price correction much, but more like a transaction has been shrinking for now. A few months, I think 4 months probably in a row now, 4 to 5 months in a row now. So I know mortgage has been a little bit improving, but still historically high, and which will remain one of the issue for prevent people probably from buying. So do you have any thoughts about again, given uncertainty about where the housing market is going?
So I would argue that there's probably we're seeing a reduced number of transactions. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges, supply of housing isn't quite there, and whatever housing is available tends to be really fairly expensive in Howard County, especially. So it's really going to be challenging. Now then you layer on a 5.5% mortgage rate. That means that cost of that, the average home price. I think the median home price in Howard County is around $460. Maybe I'm a bit off, but generally speaking, it tends to be expensive. I will say, just on my own visual inspection, I see more and more housing developments, and the price of from $1 million tends to be sort of a starter. I've not seen any inexpensive homes being built in Howard County, which kind of means that individuals who are buying these houses tend to be affluent, but they also may be impacted by interest rates. So I would predict we're not going to see lots of sales as we have in the past, given the fact that mortgage rates tend to be up and supply tends to be constrained.
Thank you. So any other questions from the audience? By the way, this is just it's not necessarily a question, but really just a comment. There are a lot of great informations, but also the labor force participation part also, it's pretty impressive. That was really the issue globally, but also regionally, that will remain a constraint, I guess a challenge for many.
Yeah, I think you see it in a lot of places. And what you're also seeing is many restaurants and hotels are cutting back on their services because they just don't have enough staff to do what they need to do. That's been a challenge. So that means that's less revenue for them, which basically means they're paying less taxes because they're less. So I think this has been an ongoing challenge for individuals.
So if no further questions, thank you so much.
Well, just one thing.
I'm sorry.
On that issue, I'm sorry. I'm stepping on somebody there.
Just me.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Todd.
You go first.
No, please go ahead.
On the labor force participation issue, is if you dive a little deeper, are the demographics of the labor force participation changing? Is there any evidence of it getting younger, getting older, racial composition changing? Where is the participation rate falling and rising?
I have not looked into the deeper data nationally. I can say I know for amongst genders, it was predominantly women had a slightly lower participation rate post-COVID, primarily due to childcare issues. But I've not broken it down by race or demographics. But we have seen sort of a lot more early retirements. So I would imagine that on the average, we're probably kind of seeing a bit more of a younger pool of individuals. But a lot of the jobs that are facing vacancies tend to be in the service sector. So your restaurants, your hospitalities, those were the biggest challenges. IT and nursing, they've always faced shortages. But the question is we're not seeing that was pre-COVID, post-COVID. But I would argue we're seeing the new thing is now in restaurants and service and hotels. We're seeing much more of a stronger decline in participation rates.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is actually more of a go back. You answered the one question I put in the chat about the sources of the CIP funding requests. The other thing, going back to those slides, is you talked about how some of the revenues related to changes that were made in terms of legislation, the facility surcharge, transfer tax. I mean, you said there were double-digit decreases in incoming revenues. Do you guys have something that shows like a trend line of how where we were a few years ago versus where we are now? It actually, I think, would be a pretty important thing to know. I know there were a lot of assumptions when some of these pieces of legislation were put forth, and clearly those assumptions aren't happening. So it'd be nice to see, the trend, what the trends were there.
Yeah,
previous to legislation than after.
Right. I think on the January 31st, that's a part I will present the revenue projection. I will be happy to share some information. And it does actually, the rate change there, especially some of the rate is phased in over time. It does actually provide increase compared to we could to like a baseline. If there's no rate increase, what it will likely be. So that actually does provide a lot of capacity. And also, don't forget, last couple of years, the housing market has been really good. So the transaction itself there has been generating some of the drivers there. But then the more recent experience year to date, fiscal year, that we have been seeing the things shrinking, especially the last few months there, because the market and actually some of the funds, as I mentioned, is as high as like a 30% decrease on that. So I think it really depends where we are heading. If that continues for how long, then what's going to happen there. But we'll be happy to share with you what has been happening, and also we could put how much is attributed to the rate, how much is rate attributed to the base itself. So we'll be happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, great presentations from everyone. It's very, very informative, and also thanks to all the great questions from the committee as well on that there. So we are right on time. So let's just finish now, and next week come back. We'll have two subjects to discuss. One is Dr. Clinch is going to share another very important piece of economic outlook, and he's going to more focus on Maryland and Howard County, including personal income projection. Again, very, very important to the revenue forecast there. And also we will share a draft report on the financial impact analysis of HOCO by design. As the staff will work together, get you the first draft there. It's going to be a short draft there. And then with a lot of attachment from prior meetings there, and then we will collect feedbacks based on the input next week, and then we're going to wrap up the report. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.